Hello and welcome to By the Numbers, a new series where we're looking at every class in 2024 Dungeons & Dragons. We'll look at all their features, create a stereotypical build for them, and then we'll look at their damage, control, durability, and mental resistance, and see how they map out as a whole. Then we can put them alongside all the other classes we've done and create a tier list in all those categories. Today, we're going to look at the Monk. Monks in 2014 were really disappointing. They had a ton of great features up to level 7, but then they just got worse and worse as the levels progressed. And they got piles of boring or almost useless features. They had pretty much no feats they could synergize with. On top of all that, they had startlingly scarce resources. Thankfully, Monk 2024 came out swinging and had massive improvements all across the board. Starting right at level 1, with their key feature martial arts, this has some significant upgrades. 1, it does more damage, starts out as a d6 instead of a d4. Second, you can do a bonus action unarmed strike, period. You don't have to tie it to an attack action or anything, so you can bonus action first and then do your action later. You can even pair it with a spell. This makes multiclassing very friendly. Last, you can grapple with your dexterity now. Monks should be the good grapplers. Now they can be. Pair this with the grappling feat, which we'll talk about later, and you can have a fantastic grappler monk. Also at level 1, we get unarmored defense, and this is the same. At level 2, they have renamed Key to Focus, and I don't really care. I'm just glad they didn't call them discipline points. And just so you know, I'm probably going to say Key a few times in this video instead of Focus. Flurry of Blows, you can do 2 unarmed strikes with a bonus action if you spend a focus point. Thankfully, that is also disconnected from your attack action, so you can do that first as well. Patient Defense and Step of the Wind now have options where you can dash or disengage without spending any focus. And if you want to, you can spend 1 focus to tack on a dodge on top of that. Key was such a scarce resource that it was punishing to spend them this way. This is a massive quality of life bump to monks. Also at level 2, we get Unarmored Movement. This is the same as in 2014 and boosts our speed a ton. We also get a new feature called Uncanny Metabolism. Once per long rest, when you roll initiative, you can regain all of your focus points. And you regain some HP too. This can really lighten the monk's load. They can use focus a lot more freely when they have this. I'm a big fan. Moving on to level 3. They took Deflect Missiles and changed it to Deflect Attacks. Now it's quite good. You can deflect melee attacks or ranged attacks, as long as they're bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. It reduces damage the same amount, that's a d10 plus your dex plus your monk level. And if you reduce that damage to 0, you can fling that attack somewhere else, even right back to the same person. It's such a solid boost because now you can do it every round. It'll boost the monk's defenses a lot, but also it just feels like the flavor's so right. Deflecting attacks, parrying them, and putting them right back at them feels really monkey. Take a look at this chart here. I used the same one for Rogue's Uncanny Dodge. But here we talk about how much damage they can reflect with Deflect Attacks. And at level 5, you can't actually deflect a Fire Elemental's attack because it's not bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, but it's just an example. Monsters at level 5 can deal 10 damage per hit. We can prevent, on average, 14.5, so we can prevent the entire damage. But at this point, only about 60% of the damage that we take actually comes in bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. So I've reduced that down to 8.7. We can continue onward, and at level 13, spoilers, we're going to get a way to deflect any damage type, not just bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. So here, we can prevent about 100% of the damage. So it's about twice as good as Uncanny Dodge. Also, I have this table here showing how much damage you can do when redirecting as well. And actually, it's a decent amount. Dex saves are one of the lowest saves, so it's pretty reliable. Alright, moving on to level 4, we have our feats. I want to talk about some general feats that I think will synergize well with monks. The first one is Grappler. The Grappler feat lets you replace 1 attack with a grapple, and then you have advantage on all of your attacks against people that you're grappling. Monks have lots of attacks, so grab them once, and then every attack after that has advantage. It'll be a really solid damage and control boost. Charger can be a decent boost to our damage and our control. If you like to do that skirmisher play where you're coming in and out, then it would be good for you. Crusher, with unarmed strikes, you're dealing bludgeoning damage. The only bad thing is that this is a strength or a con boost, so unfortunately it might be harder to pick this one up. Defensive Duelist, you can potentially use your reaction there instead of using it for Deflect Attacks, but I think there's maybe enough conflict that it's not worth it. Depending on the build though, it could be much better to do that. We also are Wisdom based, so a lot of things that boost our Wisdom, such as Fey Touched, Shadow Touched, Telepathic, those could be great feats for us to pick up and boost other elements of the game. And similar to that idea, Skill Expert. Monks don't have a lot of stuff to do out of combat, unless you're doing exploration and you can run across surfaces and whatever, but it could be nice to have some expertise in certain skills and have more contributions out of combat. Slasher and Speedy, these ones can synergize well. I think a big one though is going to be Weapon Master. This gives you a weapon mastery with one weapon, and you're going to pick up a weapon that gives you the Nick Mastery. This will let you add a free attack. It does probably need some weapon juggling where you're drawing and stowing so that you can use your unarmed strike, but it is a reliable damage boost. So there are actually a lot of feats that synergize with Monk this time around, especially Grappler and Weapon Master. Although probably people will just take one level of Fighter, and that will give them weapon masteries, and it will give them 2-weapon fighting as well. Alright, and that sums up the feats. At level 4, we also do get Slow Fall, and this is the same as ever. You reduce falling damage and land lightly on your feet. Alright, at level 5, monks get extra attack, and they get Stunning Strike. Now, Stunning Strike is mostly the same, but has a lot of significant changes. Now, you can only do it once per turn, and the stunned condition only lasts till the beginning of your next turn, not the end. The benefit, though, is now you can do it from range, which might be interesting, and if they succeed on the save, they still get some negative side effects. They have half speed, and the next attack against them has advantage. And that's nice to have, especially since monsters are quite likely to pass that con save. One other change that's not in this text is that stunned condition now doesn't affect your movement speed, so you can move around while you're stunned. Probably not going to affect your tactics all that much, but it does feel weird, especially since if they pass the save, their speed is impacted, but if they fail the save, their speed is not impacted. All in all, it's the same kind of feature, but a lot of it is different. Personally, I really like the redesign. I think once per turn is a fantastic move. Now monks aren't going to be niched and limited to just doing Stunning Strike. There are so many other ways of spending your focus, and now you can feel free to do that. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are very angry about that though. Moving along though, at level 6, we can now change our unarmed strike damage from bludgeoning to force. Realistically, this isn't a big change from 2014. At level 7, we get Evasion. This is a fantastic defensive feature. I went over this a bunch in the Rogue video, but I'll show the table again. A lot of damage comes in through dex saves, so being able to mitigate all of that damage when you succeed is fantastic. And since we're dex based and have proficiency, we're very likely to succeed. Right now at level 7, it doesn't boost our durability a ton, but as we go along, it's going to be very impactful. Moving along to level 9, we have a feature called Acrobatic Movement, and this is basically the same as it is in 2014, just renamed. You can move along vertical surfaces and run across liquids. That seems really fitting for the monk, especially since they have such high movement. Our next level, at level 10, we get Heightened Focus. And oh boy, do monks everywhere rejoice when they get this. It boosts unarmed strikes to do 3 attacks now. Patient Defense now gives you temp HP when you use it, and Step of the Wind lets you carry another creature alongside you when you move. It's a solid bump to our damage, control, and our durability. Let's take a look at Patient Defense and see just how much this durability will affect us. From level 1 to 9, when we use Patient Defense, we can get the dodge action. Here I show how much damage we take normally and damage we take if we have dodge action. From level 10 onwards, we gain this temp HP, and we can see that we're preventing about half of the damage we're taking. It's going to be a very solid feature for when your monk is in trouble and you need an extra boost to your defenses. We're dodging, so they're less likely to hit us, but if they do hit us, we already have temp HP, and we can use our reaction to reduce that damage too. If instead of hitting us they target our dex save, well, we got that covered. The only thing they can really do to us is attack our con saves, for now. We also get one more feature at level 10 called Self-Restoration. This is kind of a combination of 2 features from the 2014 monk. What it does is it lets us remove the charmed, frightened, or poisoned condition at the end of our turn. The great thing is that unlike 2014, it doesn't require action anymore. It'll just happen at the end of our turn. A huge percentage of debuffs come in the form of Charmed, and Frightened. Some of those, if you fail, don't even give you another chance to save, but monks are effectively immune to them. I'd say probably 70% of the debuffs are Charmed or Frightened. Add in Poison, and that's even more. This will boost our mental resistance quite a lot. If we fail a wisdom save, I'll be conservative and say maybe about a 50% chance that we can just shrug it off. Also, we are affected for one turn at least, so there's that too. But this table shows just how much it boosts our resistance. And just a reminder, resistance is how likely we are to succeed on a wisdom save. So we can see here at level 10, we have a 40% chance to pass a wisdom save, but if we take self-restoration into account, we end up with a 70%. This is a pretty significant boost, and remains relevant our entire career. Alright, moving along to level 13. Now we get a bump to our Deflect Attacks, and it turns into Deflect Energy. We can now deflect any type of damage. And right now at level 13, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing is about 30 to 40% of the damage we're taking, so this is going to help us a lot. Now we can solidly use this every turn, all the time. Moving on to 14, we get Disciplined Survivor. This is a renamed version of 2014 feature, and it gives you proficiency in all saves. And you can re-roll a failed save using a focus. Holy cow, we are unstoppable now. Here's a table showing us with and without this feature, and how likely we are to succeed if we spend a focus. Moving on to 15, we get a feature called Perfect Focus. If you roll initiative and you have less than 4 focus points, you now have 4 focus points. Hopefully you never need to use it, but if it happens, it happens. At level 18, we get Superior Defense. This is very similar to the 2014 Empty Body feature, except I think it's much improved. First off, you can just activate it at the start of your turn. You don't need to spend an action doing it. That is huge to me. The first round of combat is often the most impactful, and you're going to spend that whole turn just turning invisible. Also, it costs 3 focus points instead of 4, so that's good too. But instead of turning yourself invisible, it gives you resistance to all damage, except force. And right now at this level, with the pre-existing monsters that we have, about 9% of all damage is force damage. So you have resistance to pretty much all damage. I would way rather have this than Empty Body, even though it doesn't turn you invisible. It gives a better boost to our damage and our defenses. And then at level 19, we get a epic boon. The one they suggest here is Irresistible Offense. This lets you overcome piercing, bludgeoning, and slashing resistance. It also lets you deal extra damage equal to your ability score when you crit. I'm not sure if this is really the best choice for monks, because ignoring resistance to those damage types has already been overcome by your feature that turns it into force damage. Now, we are a lot more likely to crit because we can be doing a lot of attacks on our turn, and they can potentially be at advantage too. In the build I did at level 19, it's about 7 damage per round. I think it could be more with combat prowess, but I'm pretty happy with this. And at level 20, the Monk Capstone is much improved. It gives you a +4 to your dexterity and your wisdom scores. This will contribute to our damage, our control, our durability, and our resistance. It's a very solid capstone. Now let's talk about our stereotypical monk build we're going to do. There are a lot of great ways to boost a monk. Grappler or Nick or other things. In this build though, I'm going to go straight unarmed monk. The most plain vanilla monk imaginable. Needless to say, this is not an optimized build. But I do think it's the stereotypical monk. For the most part, in our feat selection, we're just going to bump our dex and our wisdom. But because we have an odd dexterity, I'm going to take skill expert to boost it to an 18. You could take something else here, but I think monks do need some out of combat help. And the things that I would take to boost our damage would really change our build. I should point out here that normally I assume we have half of our short rest resources. But because of our new feature that replenishes focus, I'm going to assume here that we have 3/4. This already is a huge bump, and I think you'll see that once we compare it to 2014. We start out attacking with our fist and using our bonus action to do one more attack. Once we get our focus, we can flurry of blows once an encounter, and we'll keep increasing the amount we have an encounter until we're using flurry of blows every turn. Once we get deflect attack, we're going to use that every round as well. At level 7, we now have enough focus to do stunning strike once an encounter, and we'll keep increasing that until we are also stunning strike every turn. We can see here the probability that we're going to generate advantage from our stunning strike. This is going to increase as we're doing more and more stunning strikes. Once we get superior defense at level 18, we'll use that every combat, and that means we don't have enough focus to use Deflect Energy every turn, but we'll keep building that back up once we get more focus too. Now let's take a look at our damage per round. I should note here that I also calculate combat space alongside damage per round. Combat space measures what percentage of a deadly encounter you take out. By itself, I think DPR doesn't give you enough information to fully understand what that means. 10 DPR can be really good or can be really bad, it depends on the level. So what I do is I show it as a percentage of what you're taking out by yourself. So at level 1, we have a damage per round of 8.8, and that takes out 49% of the combat. That's a lot right now. As we continue on, that drops, taking out less combat space, about 40% all the way to level 7. And this is when 2014 Monk started going downhill too. For us though, we get another bump at level 10, and now we have enough focus to start deflecting energy, and that'll boost our damage too. We continue being around 35 to 40 for most of our career. And at the end, at level 20, we're dealing 75 damage per round, and that turns into 42% of a deadly encounter. All in all, a monk is going to feel just as powerful at level 20 as it did at level 1. It's going to feel very consistent throughout its entire career. I really love that. If we average out our combat space throughout our career, we do, on average, 37.8% of a deadly encounter. It isn't the highest damage we've got so far, but it's pretty decent damage, especially once we take the other things into account. Let's take a look at our durability next. Oh boy. Durability is a measure of how many rounds you can last if an entire deadly encounter is focused fire on you. Monks don't have the highest AC, but it scales pretty well with their level as long as we're focusing on our dex and our wisdom. We do, however, get a lot of defensive options for monks. Deflect Attacks every turn does a lot for us. Then add in Evasion, and that's taking out a bunch of damage there. Then the bump from Deflect Energy and Superior Defense, and all in all, the monk just builds and builds into this really tanky character. Take a look at this graph here. It continues going up and up until at level 20, we're lasting almost 8 rounds. 8 rounds? That's so crazy. And we could boost this a ton if we used Patient Defense too. And although we get a big boost at later levels, all throughout our career, we end up with a very respectable durability. For tier 1 and 2, it hovers at around 2, and that's very close to what the Barbarian is. If you average it all out, Monk can last for about 2.8 rounds, and that is very good. Next, let's take a look at our control. For those who haven't seen my other videos, I have a way of doing this. What I do is I take the unconscious condition, divide it up into a bunch of parts, and I use those as a basis to build how much control a character can do, and I have a numerical value. If you have 100 control per round, that means you're doing the equivalent of knocking one person unconscious every round. Here we're getting control from 2 places. One is our boost to our movement speed, and our second is from Stunning Strike. I think it's fair to split up our mobility and our pure control into 2 different aspects, and I think I'll do this once we do a summary video on all the martials. But for now, I will sum them together, and the control we get from Stunning is pretty good. Once we get into the swing of things, we can do about 40 control per round. For a martial, that's quite good. If we average it all out, we end up with a 29.6 control per round across the entire level curve. Now for the final aspect we look at is mental resistance. This is we take 3 will saves and see how likely we are to succeed on all of them, and then we average them out. For us, monks are wisdom-based characters, so they already have a decent will save. They're not proficient in them off the bat, but they have a high wisdom score. We can see that at level 1, we start out with a 55% chance to succeed on a wisdom save. That steadily decreases until we get our self-restoration feature, and then we can shrug off our charmed, frightened, and poisoned conditions. That boosts us back up to a 60%, and then at level 14 we get proficiency in all saves, and then we stay at about 70 to 80% until the end of our career. If we average it out across our entire career, we end up with a 59.8% resistance. And that just ekes past the fighter, who previously had the highest resistance out of all the classes we've looked at. Now, let's compare this to the 2014 monk. In 2014, we can do a very similar build, but we have much less ki to work with. We only end up being able to Stunning Strike every turn at level 15, compared to doing it at level 11 in 2024. We also have lower martial arts damage, and we don't get that bump at level 10 with the extra damage. We can see that at level 7 we have a 34% combat space, and we end up going lower and lower and lower until it hits eventually 17.5% combat space. Now that is low damage. Technically, I qualify anything below 20% as low damage. Not even low damage for a damage dealer, just low damage. And this fits the bill. We also have significantly lower durability because deflect missiles is so much less useful. Overall, this is our damage comparison from 2024 and 2014. We can see that they're pretty similar to level 9, and then it's just downhill. For durability, we do get the tough feat in 2024, so that helps us just off the bat. But our deflect attacks gives us a big boost. And we see another bump at level 13 when it can deflect any attack, and again at level 18 when we get resistance to all damage. All across the board, 2024 is a much more durable monk. Honestly, the monk in 2024 feels like an unstoppable force. It's hard to deal damage to them through their AC, deck saves don't work, con saves we have blocked up, and they just shrug off any mental effect. So it might not deal the highest damage out of all the classes, but combine it with all these other aspects, and it becomes so solid. Let's slot it into our tiers and see where it lines up with all the other classes. It ends up around the same damage as the Longbow Ranger that uses spells. For those who missed it, I did change the Ranger's damage a bit to use Hail of Thorns, and that helped it quite a bit. Monk is slightly lower than the Rogue for control, and slightly higher than the Fighter for resistance. It completely dominates everything else in durability right now though. The nice thing about this monk is there's lots of ways to increase any of these aspects. You can deal more damage with Nick or the Grappler feat, you can gain higher control by grappling, or using Step of the Wind to drag an ally around and gain mobility. You can boost your durability a ton by doing Patient Defense, and you can boost your resistance by letting yourself re-roll those failed saves. All in all, I'm really happy with where the monk sits. It feels like the pieces fit together nicely, and it has a realized vision, and it just feels strong. Next up is Paladin. I'm really excited to see where these Smite spells line up in terms of damage and control, and I hope the Paladin feels just as good as the monk. It's the last martial class, and then we'll do a summary video and take a holistic view of all the martials before we move on to casters. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.